Hello, my friends. What's happening today? Get Jon on here in a second. Lots of stuff getting put up on the YouTube channel. We'll probably be caught up by the end of the week with all the past episodes, all 20 of them. This is the 21st here. We've got the Clips channel as well, and the Live with MattRad Instagram for Instagram clips. If you want to watch these full episodes, these full streams, they're both on the YouTube channel and on my IGTV. So please check them out. We got the audio podcast version. If you just like audio, it's Live with MattRad. Check that out. I'll get Jon on here in a second. Joining. Hey guys, how are you? Man bun game strong, thank you. Yes, my hair's getting long. What's up, buddy?
What's up?
Your hair's starting to get long too.
It's getting crazy.
I like it. How you doing, man?
Feeling good.
Yeah?
Feeling good. I had a little too much cold brew this morning. I don't normally drink the cold brew, so I'm a little hyped today, so I'm going to bring it down.
Okay.
Not to get too overreactive on this conversation here.
That's all right. This is a free space for emotional exploration. So I know we talked. I'm feeling good, man. I'm feeling really good. And we talked in previous weeks about doing more single topic discussions. And so I don't know exactly where this one's going to go, but the idea of being a finisher, finishing records, what does it mean to finish a record? What does it mean when a record is done? You and I, that's probably the place you and I overlap most in terms of what we get hired for. I mean, I do a fair amount of writing, and sometimes it's just, I'll be a top liner and somebody else will produce it and finish it. But sometimes I'm mixing. You lost me? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, you're back.
I'm back. So I'll a lot of times I get hired to finish productions and things like that. You also did that a bit in the past, but also, of course, are a mixer primarily. So you are really doing the finishing touches on projects. So there were a lot of great questions that came in. Some of them related to finishing, psychology, specific things. And then, of course, a lot of people asked about mastering as well. So I figure we talk about
different conversation.
Yeah, let's talk about finishing as an idea and conceptually. And if we get to the point where it makes sense to talk about mastering, we can do that as well. Because there's definitely questions from people. Different topic, but of course it's part of the process of records being done, of the finality of records happening. I don't know. Do you want to?
Yeah, I just talked about this with Rory on the podcast, because Rory is a mastering engineer. I think the record is known to be complete before the mastering engineer touches it, and the mastering engineer serves it up nice for the platforms at hand. I think the creative decisions and the deeming the song ready to come out and finality of it is done in the mix phase or the production phase if there's no mix phase, if they're conjoined, I guess to say.
Well, I think
that's why I think mastering it's a different, yes, it's part of the finishing, but it's not what we're actually talking about here, which is when does everybody on the team say this record's ready to be mastered to come out?
Sure. I mean, we can define it that way, but I think a lot of people, a record being finished is when it's out in the world. And so I think there's a lot of people at some point, whether it's later in this conversation or whether it's a future thing, we should demystify mastering as well, because I think people are confused as to what that is, because they know it's a part of the process, but then obviously you say it's not part of the creative portion of it, which I
didn't say that. I don't think it's not part of the creative portion of the process. I think it is. I
think we have to go into it. I mean, we have to. We should.
Yes. Yo, what? Topo Chico always.
Topo Chico. He always drinks Topo Chico. What is Jon drinking in the chat?
It's also JON, just so you know, just for future reference.
There you go.
I would appreciate that, actually. So there's way less creative headroom, both literally and figuratively, in the mastering process. So I'm not saying that it's not creative in its own right, but for example, as Rory stated the other night, Wednesday on the podcast recording, is someone asked me to raise the snare and I was like, I can't do that, right? So there's just parameters for creativity that can't exist in that process other than more of broad stroke or nitpicky EQ and compression and limiting techniques. When we're talking about creative like arrangement of a song and finishing the final version of what that song's topography is going to look like the journey across, like its landscape, that's not a mastering decision. It can't be a mastering decision unless you're chopping 8-bar sections and moving them. Like, well, that's what I mean. Like, that's what I mean. Like, I think it's a different conversation. I think there's so much to talk about in an hour on finishing the record pre-mastering that the mastering thing is a whole nother mystery.
Okay, well,
that's what I mean.
Let's go into all the stuff up until mastering, and if we get a good completion, or we need to go, if we complete the topic, obviously there's never going to be completion.
I was going to say,
then we can get into mastering. If
that's the irony. That's the irony. Well, we will finish. The irony of this whole conversation is there's really no answer to what it means to finish. But what we can discuss is both of our perspectives on our professional role as a finisher. And even when that's passed off to say you're finishing a production and you're passing it off to someone like me who's finishing the mix, and then I'm passing it off to mastering who's delivering it. But more records have been delivered without a final master than they have without a final mix.
Well, I would like to just broaden it, because I think it's do these streams, there's people who are doing very similar things, maybe even a higher level or at the same super high level as what we're doing, that are very nuanced about every little bit, and their role is very specific in the process. And then there's people who are making records in their bedroom and they're like, why do I have to master? What does that mean? I don't know how to finish. So I want to make sure we're kind of thinking about it in the broadest possible sense. And obviously, if you're going to make a record, mastering comes in at some point. So let's start with the things before that, and if we get there, we get there.
Okay.
Let's look at some of the when you think of finishing a record, whether it's production, mixing, whatever. What do you think are sort of the essential differences between a great song that has some production already and then a finished master? What are the things you hear, whether it's your role as a mixer or just generally? I think even more generally, as we're talking about, what makes a finished record?
Yeah, so I wanted to start there. This is a great place to start. So I've pondered this a fair amount. I've talked about it out loud a fair amount. I'm actually kind of looking to forgive and forfeit the title mixing engineer and it be deemed as finisher. I don't like to call myself a mixing engineer. I don't say, when someone says, what do you do? I don't say, I'm a mix engineer. I say I make records, right? Yeah. That's the first, oh, well, what do you do? Do you produce? And I say sometimes. Do you write? Not really anymore. I used to. I put myself in the position of finisher. Yeah. And that's what I mean. That's why I think that talking about the mastering thing is a separate thing, because I don't think you can deem the mastering engineer as the finisher, and that's another thing that we could discuss and argue. And I'm talking about it more from an arrangement point of view, where you have access to stems, access to stripes, whatever language you want to call them, access to parts, the instrumentation that we could dramatically shift the way a record feels. It's very difficult to do that in mastering unless you do some wild filter move and you take off all the top and you're like, oh, I want it to sound tapey, so we're going to put it, yes, you can have subtle texture differences in mastering, but in the mixing and the production, there's way more hands-on ability to shape the record, right? So I think of myself as a finisher. So I don't think I'm mixing, because I'm not changing levels all the time, right? So the answer that I get when someone says, do you do this? My answer is always, sometimes. Yep. It's too vague of a title, this mix engineer. We used to mess with balances more. We used to have sole creative decision on EQs, because you're in the room with the producer and you're engineering the whole time, and you're, whatever, that there's also some cross-pollination there with production, but you're sound designing. We talked about that in week 1 or 2 of our conversation here. I consider myself a finisher and a sound designer. Finishing is a trust factor to me. Finishing is someone says, you've done this a fair amount of times, a lot of times, more than I have amount of times. You've done this. I don't know how to finish it, so you're going to finish it. And the more you do that, the more you can assert yourself as the expert of an expert of finishing, and then you're a finisher. Again, not a mix engineer, you're a finisher. So a real life example, because I love to give real life examples. Yesterday, I was wrapping up a record for a homie of mine, Josh Murdy, who's producing, and his rough mix sounded so good to the point where I even made the joke to him. I was like, yo, why don't you just put this out? Like, it's not even a joke. Like, I think the record could have sufficed the way it was. Now, he says, I know what you do to a record. I need you to finish this record. So I do it, comes back. I mean, we're really good homies. So, like, there's already a lot of texting, but he's been still blowing me up even as of last night. Like, dude, it sounds so good what you did, how you finished it, how it's all glued together now. It's like, yeah, his rough mix to me sounded so good, but all the parts sounded good. Everything sounded so concise and like a little bit overthought. It's like, well, I need enough of this hi-hat, I need enough of this guitar, I need all these things. And then I think my strong suit is I try to make it sound like a record. Like, you're not listening to the guitar, you're not listening to the drums, you're not listening to anything in particular, maybe the vocal, because we all know the vocal is the most important part, other than groove to a record, that I want you to hear it as a whole. I want you to see the painting as a whole, like this visual, auditory, physical experience. And that's how I think about the mix process in general. So like, I always, there's techniques at hand too that come to mind with this. I start from the top a lot. I'm constantly hearing the journey and the arc of the song. I use the word topography always because it's like a city and it's a landscape. It's not just, there's peaks, there's valleys, there's highs, there's lows, there's wider roads, there's this, it's a long journey. And I think that, like, I consider mixing 4-dimensional. I don't even see it as 3-dimensional. Like, people always say, like, oh, 3D, like someone just said, how do you get that 3D width? I'm also thinking temporally, like the time of record and the journey. And I think that's the finishing, like from start to finish. Are you engaged? When you're disengaged, how do I make that engagement happen again? Because I get disengaged. I'm always, like I said, from the top. So start from the top, get through the first verse. Did anything trip me up? Not like a click and a pop or like a weird error that I'll go back and fix later. Like, creatively, is this arc happening? When that next pad comes in, is there enough low mids that like make my belly shake and feel like in a slower record where there's like maybe a trap record and the pad comes in on the pre-hook and you're like, that's the only new element. Like, what is that doing to you? How does it make you feel? And I know that's happening in the production. I know it's happening in the songwriting, but that's the only thing that I need to worry about versus when you're writing the song. And then you know what that's like being in the room. And I know what it's like for a short amount of time. You're thinking about a lot of different things. You're thinking about the melody. You're thinking about, there's so much to think about. And my one job is to think about the full arc of the song. Whatever that means, EQing, there's all these techniques and these tools that we have at hand, but that's a broad stroke view into my head of how I think about finishing a record, and then mixing is part of it.
Yeah.
But I didn't change one balance of Josh's mix on this thing. I didn't change anything that's a dramatic, and he thought I did. He's like, oh, I love how you brought forward that thing. I was like, yeah, I didn't raise the volume of it. I didn't like mess with your balance it. I didn't at all. Like, and but I'm doing it with other techniques, like reducing bits and pieces out of something else, saturating in some additive character and texture into a sound to push it forward, but without changing the volume per se. So as a mix engineer, I'm not changing a volume. So it's hard for me to say that like I'm mixing because I'm not touching a fader. Yeah.
So it sounds so. That's a great.
Yeah, how does that make you feel? What's your?
I think that's great. I think that when I think about finishing records, I think that's like the last, for lack of a better number, just that's like the last 30%, or that's the last third of finishing. Because I think finishing. When I think of finishing records, I think of the part after the songwriting. It's which is sort of just like producing a record. But these days, there's very few songs that are like people sit down, they write the lyrics and the melody and the chords, and then they go record it and produce it. So much of production happens during the songwriting process.
All at once.
that then after the process where you're writing the song, and by the way, finishing can be you can finish a record on day one. It's rare, but those sort of things can happen. Things can be spontaneous. Everything is just lands in the right way and you're done. But I think of finishing as you have a production that makes sense with the song is written. Okay, how do you get from there, which is either a really good song demo or a pretty complete idea, to we're ready to put this out? And that includes mixing. I would say that includes mastering. We can get into that, but it also includes a step or two before that, which is, maybe you need to edit it and there's no first post chorus. Maybe it's you need to add another couple layers of background vocals, even though you thought you were done. You need some extra oomph in the chorus, and it requires recording more. I think people are very curious. How do you make something sound finished or professional or just done? When do you know that you're done? And the reason why we can take so long, we could probably talk about this for multiple hours, is that, like so many things that are important in this process, there isn't really one good answer. A lot of it comes down to experience. A lot of it is trial and error. A lot of it is, hearing two guys like us talk about it and even disagree about what the heck we're talking about in order to get to some place where we're both thinking about things in a slightly new way, or, new ways to approach things. I think the idea of finishing a record is something that you said in there, which I think is maybe the fundamental is, we're not talking about the song. We are talking about the mix sometimes, but we're also talking about the arc of the song, the topography. Yeah. Topography is a great word. Topography, the way a landscape looks, how many peaks and valleys, and how dense this part is, and it's up high, but it's clean. So the topography
it's the art. It's the art of mapping. It's the art of mapping a terrain. And in most music, there's a city. It's like Utah. There's like Salt Lake City. You get off, you land in Salt Lake City, and there's mountains all behind this like little city involved. Like the song is in this big giant world, and inside of that world, there's another little world of all these different parts. It's like, that's why it's hard to just say it's a landscape. There's more. It's rigid. There are these points, especially in 4 to 8 bar loop popular music. It's like some things just stop, right? You listen to a Michael Jackson record, you could hear Bruce Swedien like fade out a thing, and Quincy like, oh, let's bring that shaker up now. And it's like, it doesn't just come in and enter. Like the shaker starts to come in. I mean, and there is a bit of that angularity in those records too, but there's more of these like nuanced fades. The music that we're making right now doesn't really call for that. And I was aware of that like a good decade ago. So I've been trying to master the art of transitions in blocked music. So I think of that topographically, because there is uphill mountains, but there's also just like boom, boom, skyscraper, like hit you in the middle. You're like, wait a second, where did that come from? So to me, it's a little more visual than just saying, oh, like the peaks and valleys of a record. It's like, there's some hard lines. Absolutely.
And you mentioned Michael Jackson. I think I said it on a previous stream, but I heard this story. I don't know if it's true or not. Could be apocryphal, but I think it's a great example of how to think about this stuff. That apparently when Michael Jackson was adding a vocal or doing a tweak on the bridge or something, every time he would make an adjustment on the mix, on a vocal, on something, he would listen to the song from the beginning. Every time. Because whatever you're doing at the end of the bridge, transitioning to the last chorus, it actually matters what has happened for the 2 minutes before that. So thinking of songs, if you're thinking about finishing a record, you're thinking of it as topography, as arc. What does this function with respect to the rest of the song, with respect to the vocal, with respect to the performance? And something that you said there, which I really like and I want to hone in on, is so much of record making today is loops. Like you said, 8 bar loops, people, copying and pasting things. It's a way you make records quickly. It's great. It, used to be that you'd actually have people playing all the way through. Pre-computers, you actually have to, like, with the exception of some tape loops and cutting, like you have a drummer playing a whole performance. And even if you're splicing between performances, it's still an arc of a performance. And a lot of records are missing that these days. The records that don't sound finished often suffer from things being very blocky. I've definitely been brought in on records before when you get a production and like the verse feels a certain way and the pre feels a certain way and the chorus feels a certain way, and they feel different. There are 3 different things happening.
we should add a quick distinction in there that Sicko Mode doesn't count in this conversation. Those are different songs.
Yeah.
And like, I know people are going to think about that. Like, yes, it can work, but it's Drake and it's Travis Scott and it's two records put together as one. Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about an arrangement. The song is in the same key. The tempo doesn't change. And it's to maximize its possibility of success in popular music, radio, whatever.
Yeah, and that's the other thing I'll finish my thought in a second, but the other thing to think about is that even in the last 5 years, music arrangements and what is considered proper has changed dramatically. It used to be, if your song was like 2 minutes long, people were like, that's way too short. But that's only since like the 70s, because then if you go back to the Beatles, like Rubber Soul or one of those first albums, almost all the songs are under 3 minutes. I think they're all like between 2:20 and 2:40. And so then Lil Pump comes back, and other records like that a few years ago where songs are like 1:58 with an intro.
I mixed a 2:07 the other day, and I was like, where's the bridge? Oh, I guess it doesn't need a bridge.
So thinking about these things in terms of what are the rules for how records are supposed to be is not, I think, worth getting into. It's actually worth understanding that records can kind of happen in any kind of way. And Sicko Mode's a great example where it just works. And if you listen to that song as an arc, it doesn't make sense in a pop conventional format, but it just feels right. If there's enough momentum and there's an intro and it hits hard enough, and then it gives you this drastic change, and it feels a bit more like a DJ set or a cut in a music video or something like that. But it's still an arrangement and it still functions really well. And whether they thought about, we're going to make this calculated decision, or they just did it and they were just like, oh shit, there's a lot of great arrangement stuff that happens that way, where you're just experimenting, you listen from the top and you just go, fuck, this really makes sense. Getting back to what I was saying a second ago, real quick, just that a lot of people are making very blocky music. And one of the ways to make things feel finished and like there's an arc is to either program it in or actually make real performances happen between sections and transitions. Like you said, these sort of things become extra important because there's, you're not playing in a drum track down for 3 minutes. You've got the same drums, the kick drum is the same velocity, the snare drum. Maybe you're switching up some samples here and there, also another technique, but you got to think about these things in terms of what's happening over the whole 2, 3, 4 minutes. And a lot of finishing records is about making the whole thing start to finish feel good. And one of the things I will say, that I was just working on actually finishing a record last night. I was kind of, is an artist that I've worked on a couple of songs with, but nothing's come out yet. And so I was listening to some of their other stuff and realizing that there's a lot more nuance. The music appeared really, really simple. Is like a lot of the songs were like a guitar, some drums, a few vocals, maybe a little bass part, and that's about it, an 808. But it turns out when you dig in, there's the intro, the guitar is here, and then the second half of the intro, the guitars widen out. And then there's a subtle bass part, but when it goes into pre-chorus, it's filtered slightly differently. And then when it comes into the chorus, it opens up a little more, not adding parts, not doing anything besides just subtle changes. And the vocal has a little more reverb. There's a little more of a double. So it doesn't sound more dense, but it gives you just a little bit more of the breathing room so it doesn't sound loopy. And that's a thing that a lot of songs have these days. Like, my tendency, I really came up in that like late aughts, early teens era when, it's like Max Martin, Swedish Super. There's lots of dense things happening. Associate finished records with a lot of that really dense production that everything is perfectly placed so it feels big and it feels complete. But a lot of records now what the arc of the arrangement is.
Yes.
Did I lose you there? Oh, you're still there. I can't see the video. So anyway, you had some response to that.
Yeah, that's how I see the position. That's how I see the role of finisher, is making sure all of that is possible. And in that example you just gave, who knows who did that? Yeah. I've gotten a version of that exact song that you're talking about that has the guitar and the bass, and it's only that, and it doesn't have any of those moves. And then I make those moves. Yeah. To make it feel more like a growing record, and there's a journey, right? So sometimes it's already there for me and I don't have to do as much, but sometimes it is. So that's why the answer is always sometimes. But that's what I'm kind of trying to drill down to, is that the role changes all the time. And the real role is, does this sound like something worth listening to? Which is another whole thing. I just mixed the whole album. I should actually just stop right there. Never mind.
That sounds good. I think that the key thing for a lot of people who are thinking about finishing records is it is actually extremely challenging to be the person that is doing it's the Hemingway quote, write drunk, edit sober. It's very hard to be the same person in the same state, both being creatively free and throwing out random ideas that may not work, because when you're being creative, even in production, I assume even in mixing sometimes, but much more in the sort of songwriting production part, you need to be trying things that you're not sure if they're going to work or not. That's where interesting things come from. When you get out of the realm of comfort and assurance and certainty, that's where really cool, interesting shit comes from. And it's very hard to be in that part of your brain and then also be in the part of, what are the little refinements I need to make this finish? I know I can't do that very well. I very much need to, like, and this is maybe one of the pieces of advice, I take serious breaks sometimes for days between working on a record and doing the creative output and then editing and getting things in more of a finishing mode. It's very hard to do both of those things. And I think for the most part, people really need to get their brain into the mode of, you sort of step back and you go, do I like this? Am I bored 90 seconds into it? Why? Okay, then you go, why am I bored? Okay, I'm kind of tired of this sound. Let's go into it. But
yeah, you could just be tired.
It could just be tired too.
It could actually be really great, and now because of how much weed you smoked, you're just out of it, and you're unable to see objectively that what you made was cool, and now it's just not cool anymore to you. But then you play it for a homie the next day, and everyone loves it, right? It's like you have to, I mean, look, this also comes, I mentioned it earlier, and I want to go a little further into the trust part. Like, you gotta have people around. Yeah, people you could show records, both people that make music for a living, but also listen to music, and that's it. And they don't know the language of how to make it. They just go, this is tight. I like this. It reminds me of this. Like,
I got a thought real quick. It seems like the creative process is very much not about, like, when you're writing or starting a production, the creative process is much less about judgment and much less about perspective and much more about just throwing things out there, getting out of your own way and just making things happen. And the finishing process is much more about getting perspective, whether that's your own from taking breaks, getting feedback from people, much more about perspective, because at that point, you're trying to go, okay, this thing that I know feels emotionally good, now how does it translate? It's about translation, I think, more than anything else. I've got the idea. The idea is great. I've got a lyric. I've got a vocal performance. I've got an aesthetic. Now I need to do all the things to make it translate to an audience. And that's mixing. Yeah,
that's without losing that emotion that was created in the songwriting process. Right?
I think the finishing process is about getting a lot of perspective, taking a lot of breaks, getting lots of little bits, playing it next to things. The finishing process is about perspective and translation, and which is very different from the creative process. And it's very difficult to try to do both. I've tried to do both. I continue to try to do both. I go like, I did this cool thing. Is this good? Shit, I'm in the wrong mode, and I don't know. I have no idea if it's good. Oftentimes I know.
And multiple ways of translating both emotionally and sonically to multiple devices.
Yes.
And that's our job. We're supposed to know technologically where and how people are listening mostly.
Knowing if something is done is almost like the scientific method. It's like falsification. There's you don't ever know when something's done. And the truth is, there is no such thing as a finished record, because you can always do more stuff to it.
Now, okay, couple of things that I have to talk about.
Go.
One is trust. One is collaboration, and I mentioned it in my earlier monologue. And I want to just go a little deeper into that, because, I mean, the most success I have at finishing, and not monetary and numerical success of records, the satisfaction of the team knowing something is done, is when I'm working with someone I've worked with before, or someone that they've referenced me to, like, I heard this, my homie played me a record in the studio, and I think Castelli is the right fit for this thing. And I want people to feel comfortable passing off the record to be finished and know that what they get back is going to be either done or closer to finished before we collaborate on that mix now, right? Because someone like yourself, someone like OG and Volta, who I work with all the time, they should be writing another record and producing another record and passing something off to me to finish. They don't have to worry about it, right? Like, acknowledge at some point in your career, earlier the better. If you're solo and isolated, making your own records, we talked about this a lot too. Yes, we talk about saying yes to everything or not. Like, I'm still on the school of understand what you're best at. And if you're a starter, if you're a vibe starter and you're not a good finisher, don't spend 20 hours trying to finish something that you had the vibe of. And 2, find someone that can finish it for you so you can start another dope vibe. Like, let's get out of each other's way and offer help when needed and build trust and relationships. And that's something.
Can I jump in just really quick?
Yeah.
I think it's important. I think it's an amazing point. And I want to stick on it, that this doesn't mean you have to, if you're a bedroom producer and you're making your own stuff, that you got to save up all your money and spend thousands of dollars to hire some person. No, that's not at
all what I mean.
Totally. And I just want to make that very clear, because I know you don't mean that. It would be great to have Jon Castelli or MattRad and hire them to finish your records. I think maybe I'd do a good job. I know John would.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm not the right guy.
By the way, and that's the point of it, is that it's not about finding someone who is a finisher. It's about collaborating with people that can offer that perspective to you. And it doesn't even mean that you need to like have a friend who's a young bedroom super mixer. What it means is you need to be able to interact with the world somehow when you're finishing records. And sometimes, there's this great story. I don't know how much detail I can get into, but it's a story about Adele on her second record, I think 21, the big one. And she made a whole version of the record and took it back, made it in California, took it back to the UK, and played it went out for a night with all her friends to the pub, and then came back to her flat and played it for her friends. And they were all just kind of like, ugh. And she was like, I feel like it sounds like I'm fucking 40 years old. And so she then said, I need to go back to the demos of all of these. So that album there was a whole version that was produced out with like proper LA musicians and all this kind of stuff. And once she went back to the UK and played it for her friends, she was like, this doesn't feel like me. And spending all the money. And by the way, the album sold 30 million copies or something. So clearly it was the right decision, but it was because she had her friends, after going to the pub, obviously none of them are getting paid. They went out and got drunk and listened to a record. She's like, this doesn't feel like me. And through months and months and months with some of the highest level record makers, she still couldn't get that perspective, because what it really comes down to is the right perspective and the right feedback. And that may be your friend, it may be your mom, it may be, who knows? I mean, one of the things I like to do when I'm finishing records or making songs or doing anything, when I play stuff for people, friends of mine, I'll usually play them around at least 3 songs, because what I get from that is they don't have to go like, I like this, I don't like this. I just go, which one's your favorite? And through that process, you can start getting a hierarchy, and you hear things through their ears, and all of a sudden you just, without them giving specific feedback of like the chorus needs this, you just play a few songs in a row and your friends go, oh, I like that one. You learn something about the record that no amount of like expensive studio anything is going to give you perspective on.
Honestly, just press play in the room in front of people. You're going to hear it differently too.
It's so surprising
kind of that simple.
It's surprising how big that is. And if you've never experienced it, or, you haven't been in this position, you don't know. But if you have, everybody knows that I've been in the position where I sit here, I press play, and the computer's here. People are sitting behind me, and without even looking back, I hear new things in the songs, and I go, this part's too slow. It's too long.
It's not right.
This vocal isn't right. Without just having someone in the room that you're listening with, something about it changes psychologically, and that is a version of perspective. All of these things are versions of getting perspective, and they're different for different people. Sometimes it's you take 5-minute breaks and you listen back. Sometimes you play it for 3 friends. Sometimes you go out to the pub and play it after. Like, there's so many different ways to do this. But I just wanted to harp on that point that it's not about hiring an A-level person who can function this way. The reason they're A-level people is because they can more consistently get it right. They have more experience, and that's really valuable. But it's also, if you're a bedroom producer, find someone who you trust, who you can just bounce things back and forth with. And it doesn't even have to be they're a finisher and you're not. You could have, you could both be working on it. Just getting perspective.
I also, what I was saying was trying to be, I agree with everything you said, wholeheartedly. I was trying to be specific and say, no, I do think if you're a bedroom producer, you should find someone that you trust to finish, that wants to be a finisher.
Yeah,
if you go out for coffee or lunch or drinks or something or Zoom and you say, this is what I want to do. What do you want to do? And then you match with someone who says they want to finish, then you're a great team.
Yeah.
And then maybe as a team, when the budget is there, when you're working on a different kind of artist, or where maybe you just simply can't hear it as the finished product, then you engage someone like you or I, then that's different. But we want more you and I's in the world, right?
Yeah.
We don't think competitively about this. We want, there's so many songs to be written and people to make them. I want to just be a part of some cool ones.
Yeah.
And that's, so I agree with everything, but I also think that there's a specific, or should be a specific direction that if you feel that you can't converge on a final product, that you have to outwardly look for someone that's their skill. Yeah. And then you each feel valued in that position where, like, for example, me, I legitimately, and I did, this is not true my entire career or life. This is true now. I can objectively see this. I don't want to start ideas ever again. And I couldn't say that a couple of years ago. I was still making beats and stuff. So I want to help the people that want to start and not finish.
Yeah.
I have doubled down into finishing, and I can start ideas. I can make beats. I like it. It's fun. I don't like it as much as getting that trust and getting the responsibility of someone handing over their song baby and saying, John's got it. Like, just it's a unique feeling, it's niche as fuck, man. I don't know that many people that only wanted to do that. I know most mixers that wanted to be producers. I did for a time, but I don't really, I don't. I think we all try something out until one thing sticks, and this stuck. So I would advise people to try to, again, you always want people before you to learn a few steps ahead of you. It's like, I learned this at 30. Y'all should learn this at 28. Let's advise and not tell people what to do, but it offer the opportunity of this is what things could look like. Yeah. And this isn't what's talked about in Mix with the Masters or Pensado's place. Everyone's just talking about what they did. It's just not about what they did. It's what we didn't do that got us nowhere. And then something happened that got us somewhere. I want to
talk about my journey on this. I think about this a lot because I still feel like, let's see, how do I put it? I've done a bit of everything, and it's gotten me a lot of success. I've done well. I've had hit records. I've been involved with a lot of cool stuff, been around amazing, super talented people. I've been very satisfied with what I've done. If I specialized in just being a writer or just being a mixer or just being a producer, or even more specific in that, a specific genre or something like that, I probably would have more success. I think specializing and finding a team of people over a long period is far and away the best path to success, although there's lots of different ways to do things. But my personality, I would not have been nearly as happy. The fact that I have worked on records where I've just been a top liner, where I just show up and we just write lyrics all day and I don't touch a knob and I don't do anything. The fact that I can do that one day and then a week later I'm finishing a production and doing the mix, that works really well for my brain and my personality. And that's to know that that's what will satisfy me ultimately, is to actually go back and forth. When I get asked, what do you like best? What's the process you like best? I actually really like doing a different thing every 3 days. And now, I'm 36 and I recorded my first band when I was 11. And I didn't really have any real success until I was 29. So it took me 18 years of being a person who's kind of schizophrenic about it and just doing all kinds of different stuff to get to the place where I was making enough money and like, I'm going to, I'll have a career forever. But that's a long journey doing a whole bunch
You're not talking about money. You're talking about happiness.
Well, I'm talking about the relationship between those two things and how, for you, it's worked out very well that it took you a while because you tried a lot of things, but you're like, this is really the thing that I'm built to do. It's in your personality for being a chef. It's in your personality for being a mixer. It's in your personality for design, that you've been able to realize, okay, I really enjoy producing, but I don't like all these other aspects, and I love mixing, and that's worked really well for you. I am not that personality. I love mixing. One of the reasons I love talking to you is because you're like layers and layers deeper into mixing than I am. Just like I'm gonna talk to my buddy Dave Elich at some point on one of these. He's maybe the best drummer in the world. He now teaches the best drummers in the world. He's played with everybody from Miley Cyrus to the Mars Volta to the 1975 to soundtrack work. He's just a super guru, meditation, art, but drumming. And I love talking to him because I've been obsessed with drums on and off my whole life, but I've never gone that deep down the road because then I'll get excited about bass or I'll get excited about mixing or something else. And it's just important to realize, I think I wanted to say this because it's important to realize that you may not fit into one of these boxes, and that's okay. It just means you need to honestly work harder and make sure that if you're a guy who's in, or a girl who's in, like songwriting mode, you may need to find a finisher person that can help you. You may be in finisher mode. You better get the best couple of top liners and creative artists. And wherever you are at, it's important to find collaborators, and collaborators, again, can be your friends after the pub when you go out and have some drinks. You need to find people that sort of complete your creative journey. Otherwise, you'll go completely insane.
Yeah, I mean, the lines have been blurred and they're not going to be redrawn.
Yes.
No one's going to just say, well, this is what this person does again. It's like, that's just not really the way society seems to work right now. I mean, team efforts seem to be the new way. I mean, they've always been a thing, but right now it's pretty clear. Like, again, when you look at Spotify or Tidal or Apple Music, and you look at credits, you never see one person. So like, find your people that trust you. And trying to bring it back to finishing, the song is finished when everyone on this team says, yay, let's put it out. Like, it's not really done till everyone says it's done. There is a person like me that is leading the race to get it done. Like, unless it's an A&R that's emailing like, hey, we got a deadline. Like, let's take deadlines aside, because that's really the final. The final is when it needs to be done to deliver to DSPs so it can hit playlists and like actually do something with the song so it doesn't die a slow death. There's numbers behind all this and data that suggest certain things that we're not talking about that is part of this process. That if we, on Conversations podcast, I hope to interview a record executive or A&R or someone that can actually talk more to that part, because I'm sure there's some objective reality to what needs to be done to hit certain deadlines. I mean, you don't just move a movie deadline if there's no COVID. Like, the release is scheduled a year out. And you have to hit that. It's different with music. You have some flexibility, but you're considering what artist is also putting a record out at that point. The label's goal is to get you to number one. Justin Bieber can't put out a record the same day as Ariana Grande. It can't happen. They both can't be number one. And then you miss that debut number one spot. And as much as I don't give a fuck about these things, the labels give a fuck about these things deeply. That's like how they sustain, right? So there's levels to finishing. That aside, somebody on the team says it's done, or everybody on the team says it's done. And you want everybody to be on that and say, and yes, and scream and be excited that it's done. Like, that's how you get that best energy out into the world about this song, because 9 people that made the record, or someone that didn't make the record but they have perspective on the record, like, everybody that deems it done is excited. And then you kind of know there's a possibility here of success or of translation and it winning or touching someone or a few people or tons of people, millions of people. the finishing is not singular. So I might be a finisher, but I'm the end of the journey, and I'm trying to rush ahead and win that race. So people come back to me, right? So another thing is like, you're a finisher because people deem you as a finisher. So a record is finished after you touch it because you've done it. And I said that again in the earlier part of the monologue. People come back to you because you've done it. When I talk about like, is a producer a mix engineer? Sometimes, and we've talked about this earlier, I talk about it a lot with homies. Like, I don't think a producer is a mixer if they've never released a full-length album, that their role was singularly a mixer as well. I think that their final productions were the final mixes, but they didn't mix it. I think mixing is a different part of the process. We're still dissecting and discerning what that is. I don't change balances sometimes. I don't add reverb sometimes. Like, I do add reverb sometimes. So what is mixing? That's not the point. The point is it's a different part of the process. And I don't think you're a mixer until you've been hired to mix a record from start to finish. Well, and then the more you do, the more trust you gain from other people that will deem you a finisher.
The thing that I think the takeaway from a lot of this is a lot of the idea of knowing when a record is finished is really about not a consensus, but like you said, trust, and having people involved in the process that you, as a person who doesn't know if it's finished, has people around to help you figure that out, from friends to a great mixing engineer to managers and labels to other artists to whatever. It really is about does it translate? And one of the big ways to figure that out, other than your own experience, and somebody asked in there, when do you know to trust? When did you learn to trust yourself? And the truth is, you don't always know.
Never.
And you need perspective, and you need to. It's really, you need honestly, other people to give you perspective.
It's a feeling too. Like, okay, so on a more specific note, when do I think the first pass is ready to send to the artist or the producer or the team? Like, it's always different. Like, it could take 2 hours, it could take a day, it could take 2 days, it could take 45 minutes. Like, are you going to collaborate on notes with that team, or are they kind of like, you know, expecting it to be done in one pass? Like, it's always going to be different, but it's a feeling. Like, like I said earlier, I start from the top all the time. When I can get through the whole song, that's the first time I actually think to myself, which I'm in a flow state a lot, so I don't actually think when I'm mixing, and that's another conversation. I'm aware that I don't really know how to speak about it because you kind of can't.
That's fine.
But it would be fun to try to talk about it. But when I can get through the whole song, the first time I actually say to myself, oh, it's almost done. Like, that's when it's almost done. Because I never listen from start to finish if things are getting in the way. And once I can get down, it's like, okay, it's close. And I usually stop for a long break, whether that's to go make an espresso, go outside, get an espresso, go eat some lunch, and then I come back with fresh perspective and then do the last few notes that could take me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or another 3 hours, you know, but at least I know it's close to something and it's a feeling. And you get better at that feeling the more you do, you know.
I totally agree with that. I was looking at some of the questions. Somebody asked about, let's see, where was it? It's like they were asking about timeline. Man, maybe it was somebody. Maybe I missed the question. But to me, when producing a record, which is obviously different than the mixing process, when producing a record, for me, it's so much about the very first thing that happens in the record up through basically all of the parts. So even if it starts with a chorus, getting through the first like proper chorus, once that's there, then the song to me has an identity, and then it's time for finishing mode. And it's not literally this all the time, but when I think about songs, it's like if the very beginning of the song, however it's starting, up through the first real chorus. If it starts with a chorus, then maybe, but like, what's the arc of the main parts of the song? When that's there, and again, the song's already written, but I'm just talking about going through on a production, then I get into finishing brain of, okay, is the first note right? Is the is the vocal at the right level here? Does the arc feel good through this first chorus? And then you're not copying and pasting out, but you have a rough idea of what the rest of the song is going to feel like. Unless you're, you know, a sicko mode type record, which is going to take a left turn and you're going to put another song in there.
Yeah.
Talking about one song. the very first note through the first repetition of the chorus, that's like if you have that as an identity, from there you're just building the rest of it. And some of that is mixing, some of that is arrangement, some of that is perspective. And then the next milestone is the thing you talked about, which is if I listen through it all the way through and there aren't gaping holes and it makes sense, I go, okay, this is getting close. And then I go into all the little refinements, and then it's lots of perspective. And by the way, then I might go, somebody asked one of the questions, do you ever just rebuild a production from scratch? I've definitely done that. I've definitely gotten to the point where, man, this feels really great. Fuck, I want to start all over. And then I just do, I mean, obviously I save it, but then I start all over. But the idea of what's happening
in the mix too.
What's happening at the beginning of the song and starting from there and having an arc that seems to make sense, that to me is how to think about finishing and how to think about getting there.
Look, a song has a life. The life of the song can be injected in any part of the process, and sometimes it's not till the end, and sometimes it's ingrained right from the beginning. And the job of finishing, whoever's doing it, is to recognize that the life is ready to be lived. And I know that's a little bit vague, but it's a feeling, and you really get it. And it kind of comes back to that. You're like, people are going to get this. And that's when you know that a song is finished. What are you going to say? And
people are going to get this, and you're playing it for people and they get it. I mean, that's part of it too.
Yeah.
There are very few songs that I've ever felt were finished without getting perspective of other people hearing it.
Yeah.
Like, even if it's like I'm finishing something and then sending it to the artist for the first time, I still want it to feel complete. And I'm always playing it for someone else. Obviously, COVID time's a little harder because people aren't coming in and out a lot, but getting perspective is a hugely important thing. We got about 8 minutes left. I want to see if there's any specific questions that we can get into. Alexander asked about the energy and dramatic arc of an arrangement. That's pretty much what we've talked about this entire hour.
The whole time,
I kind of like this one. Would you advise setting strict deadlines for finishing songs and projects? I think the answer is yes, but then you can break them based on what you need. I think it's good to give yourself an idea of what you're trying to do rather than just I have unlimited time. But you can't really schedule creative time.
A deadline presents itself usually externally.
Yeah, I like the idea. I mean, this is my personality too. I need the idea of like, I'm going to work on these 3 songs the next 3 days. And even if I don't, I at least have an idea in my mind. That sets me just personally on a course of like, I'm going to start working.
Yeah.
So I know I never, ever, ever stick to exactly the schedule that I think I'm going to, it's like you start with an idea. It's the same with being creative. Like, I have an idea for what this is supposed to sound like, and you go on the journey and it's never exactly that thing. I think it's definitely worth doing some sort of deadlines just for your own sanity, at least for me.
Yeah.
So Dylan asked about what do you feel like when you've lost perspective? It gets back to what we were talking about, finding people that can get that for you. I mean, taking breaks, we talk about that a lot.
It's the worst feeling. Like,
everybody gets it too.
Everybody gets it. I think this is going to sound extremely arrogant. I think I've trained myself to not lose perspective, and I think it's something you can train. I don't really drink or smoke anything when I work anymore because I've realized that takes me out of that.
Yep.
Out of the perspective pretty quickly. It can instill some creative loss of inhibitions, which can bring some reward, but I feel like it doesn't outweigh the risks at hand. So I think there's some training you can do. And like I said, I access flow state pretty fast. As of this morning, 500 days in a row of meditating, which is
nice.
Pretty sweet on waking up. Thank you. It hit 500. That's really helped. That's helped me when I can sense the loss of perspective and I become mindful of that and I walk away. Or I even just take a deep breath and I can reassess the perspective. So I think it is something you can train yourself to be better at. I don't necessarily think that I am without loss of perspective by any means, but my job is to maintain perspective. That's why I try to sleep well. I try to be healthy. I take my position pretty seriously. Now I can imagine that if you're doing what Matt's talking about, wanting to be in a role, in a different role at different times, then you can learn when and when not to do said things. And like, okay, if I'm going to write today, yeah, I'm going to have some good whiskey with this. Like, I'm going to do this. But when it's time to finish, maybe I don't do those things. Or a couple of days before I know I have to schedule to do that, I'm getting better sleep than I was. Like, I think you can exist on all of these planes. But for me, in that role, knowing it, I take this very seriously. Finishing is very, very difficult to do with substances. I mean, what you really need to do is be hyper-focused on things. I've never been good. I like smoking a joint or having a drink or something like that and being creative. But man, if you're trying to finish things and refine things, I find it basically near impossible. And actually, I wouldn't say this. I wouldn't say near impossible. I just 100% of the time, I would be better if I were focused and had good sleep and was sober. I've just never been able to be as good as a finisher when I'm not of sound mind and focus and edit sober. This is the Hemingway, write drunk, edit sober. I mean, this is almost quite literally what that is. Mix sober sometimes. Mix sober, yeah. Unless you're Mike. Maybe next week. Maybe next week we do mastering. Let's get mastering engineer to talk mastering. I don't want to talk mastering. Well, I think it's worth talking mastering from our perspective and what it's useful to us in the creative process. I think maybe it's just a 10-minute conversation. I don't know. Okay. There's a few things about like, we've got 4 minutes left. Do you want to talk about glue? Just the idea of gluing together the sound. Yeah, someone said that in the chat. Do I use saturation to glue as you folks, as us folks use compression? It's like, I don't not use compression for glue sometimes. Again, like there's no always. My whole point on the compression thing is don't reach for it first. There's something else. There's another way to fix it. So it's just, I want to constantly reiterate that. I used a compressor on a mix the other day. One, singular. It's needed to be compressed. So I used a compressor. I didn't just put it on everything because it need, you know what I mean? That's the mindset. So you folks can glue with compression as well if you want to. I think about glue in arrangement. So I don't think about a tool giving me glue ever. I don't like, I need this saturator to give me glue. It might be a byproduct of the saturation that my mix is now feeling glued together because I'm making arrangement decisions and balance decisions into it. I can't say that's not possible. That's probably highly likely, but I'm not using the saturation for glue. I'm using my ears and my association with the music and an emotional reaction to the music to bring the glue. Just how I want to hear it. It's a taste thing. So you can use whatever tool you want to bring glue. Yeah, and the idea of glue is this idea of taking a bunch of different elements and putting something on them in sum total in order to make it feel glued together. That's why people use that term. Yeah. I think people generally rely on that when they could do it on a more individual basis. I mean, we talk about like the FL Studio drums. When like Murda Beats drums hit, they have a little soft clipping, and so the drums glue together in that particular kind of way, and that's a really cool effect. But people hear that or they read that, and then they think, I'm just going to put clipper saturator on my mix, and that's going to make it glued. And it turns out most of the time you can achieve that effect with much more control and much more clarity doing these things to individual elements or subgrouping things, that sort of stuff. I don't generally put much on my mix bus these days to glue things together. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of a limiter. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of compression. What's that? One plugin. Just one plugin. It doesn't matter what it is. Just one plugin. Yeah, one plugin. People like putting multi-band limiting and that sort of stuff on the two bus. Be careful with phasing at crossover points. Yeah, I find more and more that stuff just makes it a little less clear. And maybe that's the idea. Maybe things you want them to be a little dirtier, more obscured, but I still think there's better ways to do that. There's other ways to do that, we got about 40 seconds left, so I think we probably call it here. That was fun. Yeah, we kind of I love topical discussions. Yeah, just wax poetic about things. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hit us up if you want us to talk about this stuff more or less or other topics. Chop it up. Chop it up with Matt Rad.
Yeah, chop it up. Thank you guys so much. John, love you. You guys, please check out all the various versions of YouTube and the podcast and all this kind of stuff. And hit us with questions. We're trying to be useful to you guys. We love talking to each other. We do it anyway. We want to do it on live to make it useful for you guys. So hit us up.
I never actually listened to them back, and I listened to one the other day, and I was like, oh, there was some good shit in here. So
amazing. Love you guys. Thank you so much.
Cool. Bye.
Bye-bye.